one drop of my blood on his white fur, and the king tore them all to pieces. The kingdom of Urendor lay under a shroud of white, its forests and mountains draped in endless winter. Snow fell like powdered glass from a pale, frozen sky, and the cold was so sharp it seemed to slice through the bones. The people of Urendor whispered of curses, of ancient magic buried deep within the royal bloodline, and of wolves larger than horses that prowled the forests, eyes glowing like embers in the dark. Princess Alara moved through the icy halls of the palace, her footsteps soft on the polished stone. She wrapped her cloak tighter around herself, feeling the weight of the kingdom's gaze upon her. Her hair, dark as a raven's feather, trailed behind her like a shadow. Though young, Alara carried a quiet strength, though it was often masked by the polite smiles she offered to those who came to the court. Tonight was different. A storm raged beyond the palace walls, and the wind rattled the shutters. Alara felt it in her bones, a strange, restless pull toward the forest she had been forbidden to enter. Her father, King Aldrich, had always said the woods were dangerous, filled with spirits that could twist a person's soul. But tonight, against every warning, she felt a need she could not explain, a whisper in the blood calling her into the snow. The great hall was empty. Candles flickered and cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. She paused at the doorway, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. Beyond the palace gates, the forest waited, silent and deep, as if it had been expecting her. The trees were heavy with snow, their branches bending like the arms of silent watchers. Alara stepped outside, her boots crunching softly in the snow. Every step felt purposeful, as though she were following a path already laid out by fate. And then she saw him. A white wolf, immense and regal, stood at the edge of the clearing. Its fur shone like freshly fallen snow, untouched by the storm, and its eyes were the color of winter's heart, cold, deep, and impossibly aware. For a moment she froze, fear coiling in her chest. The story said the wolves of Urendor were more than animals. They were spirits, cursed guardians of the royal line. But this wolf, it felt different. Alive, yes, but filled with a strange, silent intelligence that made her knees weak. The wolf took a single step forward. Then another. Alara's heart thumped loudly, echoing in her ears. She could not speak. Her hand went to her side instinctively, where a small cut from the castle kitchen earlier had begun to bleed. A drop of crimson fell from her finger, warm against the cold. And in that moment, the wolf's gaze fixed on her. It was as if it recognized her, as if it had waited for this moment for years. The wolf lowered its head, sniffing the air around her, and she felt a shiver not from the cold but from the intensity of its stare. And then, without warning, it lunged. Alara stumbled back, tripping over a root hidden beneath the snow. The wolf stopped inches from her, its teeth bared, eyes glowing fiercely. She could smell its breath, sharp and wild, yet there was something familiar in its presence. Something terrifying and compelling all at once. She extended her hand slowly, not daring to move too quickly. The wolf tilted its head, curious, and then her blood fell on its white fur. The effect was immediate. The wolf shivered violently, and a low, almost human growl rumbled from its chest. The snow around them seemed to quake, as if the forest itself had noticed. Birds took flight, and the wind rose to a howl. And then the wolf turned and ran, not into the trees but toward the palace itself. Alara ran after it, panic lending her speed she did not know she had. From the window of a high tower she saw the scene unfold, the wolf tearing through the guards, knocking over carts, its movements fast and terrifying. Screams echoed in the cold night. She tried to call out to stop it, but the wind carried her words away. By the time she reached the palace gate, the wolf was gone, leaving behind a scene of chaos. Guards lay sprawled in the snow, wounded but alive, their expressions twisted in fear and disbelief. And at the center of it all, a single, perfect paw print glistened red in the snow. Alara sank to her knees, trembling. The stories had always been warnings, distant tales told to frighten children, but now she understood they were real, and she had awakened something that had been sleeping for centuries, something that might never forgive. Night fell heavier, and with it came the whispers. From the far edges of the kingdom, rumors would spread. The princess had touched the forbidden. She had spilled her blood on the wolf, and the king, her father, would not forgive easily. Yet she could not turn away from the pull she felt. That creature, more than a wolf, more than a curse, had looked at her as if she were its destiny, as if she were the only one who could save it, or the only one who could fall with it. Ilara returned to her chambers, the storm outside echoing the turmoil inside her. She could feel the blood on her hands, sticky and warm, a connection she could not explain. That drop had changed everything. And in the quiet of the night she whispered into the darkness, "Who are you truly?" Hours later, when the castle slept and even the guards had succumbed to exhaustion, a sound broke the silence. A soft, almost human sigh, carried on the wind, came from the forests. The wolf's eyes, glowing in the snow, watched her from the shadows, waiting, watching. Ilara's dreams were filled with white fur and fire, with glowing eyes and a man's voice she could not place. She dreamt of running through endless snow, of hands brushing against hers, of danger and longing intertwined. She woke in the cold dawn, her heart racing, knowing the wolf, Kale, was waiting for her, somewhere in the forest, and that he would not wait forever. The palace began to stir with news of the night's chaos. Servants whispered in hushed tones about the wolf that had attacked without reason. Guards speculated about curses, and advisors debated whether the princess herself had some strange power. But Ilara felt none of the fear that clutched the others. She felt only a pull, strong and unrelenting, toward the forest and the white wolf whose eyes had spoken to her soul. She packed lightly, a cloak, some food, a dagger. She had never disobeyed her father, never defied the laws of the palace, but this was different. Something ancient had awakened, something that would not be silenced, and she would not run from it. As she stepped beyond the walls of the palace, snow crunching beneath her feet, she whispered once more, "I will find you." The wind carried her words through the frozen trees. Somewhere deep in the forest, a white shadow shifted. Eyes like winter fire glimmered in the darkness. The wolf had waited centuries for this, and now, at last, the blood of the princess had called him awake. The forest seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Snow swirled around Ilara, blinding her, yet she pressed forward. Every step drew her deeper into the unknown, toward a destiny she could neither predict nor deny. And somewhere ahead, the wolf waited, its presence a promise of danger and a spark of something she could not yet name. Ilara's heart pounded with fear and anticipation. She did not yet know what lay ahead, what power the wolf truly held, or what secrets the forest would reveal. But she knew one thing: once blood had been spilled, there was no turning back. The snow fell harder, blinding, covering her tracks even as they formed. And through the storm she saw it, glimpses of white fur moving between the trees, watching, waiting. Her blood had awakened the king's wrath, the forest's ancient spirits, and something far more human beneath the wolf's fierce exterior. And so she walked on, through snow and shadow, into a world where destiny and desire, fear and hope, collided under the watchful eyes of the white wolf. The journey had begun. Ilara had walked for hours, her boots sinking into the thick snow. The forest of Erendor stretched endlessly, silent except for the occasional rustle of branches or the distant cry of a hawk. The cold was sharp, but it did not compare to the cold knot of fear and wonder that tightened in her chest. Somewhere in this frozen expanse, the white wolf waited. She could feel it in her bones, a pull, deeper than curiosity, stronger than reason. The forest seemed alive, not merely with the whispers of the wind, but with a subtle consciousness. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the snow sometimes appeared to swirl around her feet, as if the trees themselves were guiding her forward. Alara shivered, not from cold but from the sense that she had stepped into a world older than the castle, older than the kings and queens who ruled it. She paused at a small clearing, the snow reflecting pale light from the waning sun. And then she saw him. The wolf stood there, magnificent and terrifying. Its white fur gleamed like fresh snow, untouched by the storm, and its eyes, so human in their intelligence, locked onto hers. The moment their gazes met, the world seemed to still. Alara felt as if time itself had stopped to watch them. Kale, for that was the name she felt in her heart, tilted his head. He did not move closer, but neither did he retreat. There was wariness in his posture, but also an unspoken recognition. He had been waiting, and somehow he had known she would come. Alara took a tentative step forward. "I'm not here to hurt you," she whispered. Her voice seemed small, swallowed by the vastness of the forest, yet it carried a strength she did not know she possessed. Kale growled softly, not threateningly but like a warning. Alara froze, unsure how to proceed. She could feel the magic in the air, thick and potent, pressing against her skin. She remembered the stories her mother once told her about the guardians of Urindor, creatures born of both blood and spell, bound to protect or destroy depending on the heart of the one who awakened them. The wind shifted suddenly, and Kale's ears twitched. His body tensed, muscles coiled like springs. From the shadows, a faint shimmer of movement appeared, an unnatural flickering light that made Alara instinctively step back. Kale's growl deepened, low and resonant, vibrating in her chest. He was warning her, protecting her, even as he tested her courage. Alara swallowed her fear and stepped closer again. I don't understand," she admitted. "Why me? Why now?" Kale's eyes softened slightly, though the tension in his body remained. He circled her slowly, silent and graceful, until he stopped directly in front of her. His nose twitched, and he lowered his head as if he were sniffing the air around her. Then, in a movement so quick she could barely follow, he pressed his massive head against her hand. Alara's breath caught. His fur was cold, but beneath it she could feel a heartbeat, a rhythm that matched her own. She realized then that this was no ordinary wolf. The intelligence in his eyes, the weight of his presence, was unmistakably human. "You're trapped," she whispered. Kale's eyes flickered, as if confirming her words. He growled again, but this time it sounded almost like a sigh. Alara felt a pang of sorrow. Whatever had bound him to this form had taken years from him, and yet he remained powerful, dangerous, and magnificent. They walked together, moving deeper into the forest. Every step felt like a negotiation. Kale led her to a small glade where the snow was untouched and the trees formed a protective circle. Here the wind was softer, almost respectful, as if the forest itself honored the space between them. Alara sat on a fallen log, her hands shaking slightly. Kale lay down a few feet away, watching her with unblinking eyes. Silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. It was charged, full of meaning. "Why did you attack the palace?" she asked finally. Her voice was barely more than a whisper carried on the wind. Kale's ears flicked. He did not answer in words, but his eyes reflected a storm of emotion: rage, confusion, pain, and something else she could not name. Alara realized that communication would be different here. Words were insufficient. They would need trust, patience, and courage. She reached into her cloak and pulled out a piece of bread. Slowly she extended it toward him. Kale's head lowered and he sniffed, then took the bread gently from her hand. A small victory, but a significant one. Trust, she thought. It begins with trust. Hours passed. The forest grew darker, the snow heavier. Alara spoke softly, telling him about the palace, about her life, about the loneliness she had felt beneath the gaze of royalty. Kale listened, tilting his head, his eyes never leaving hers. In those quiet moments, a bond began to form, one born of shared solitude and unspoken understanding. But the forest was not entirely silent. Shadows moved at the edges of her vision, and strange shapes flickered between the trees. The magic here was ancient, restless, and it did not welcome intruders lightly. Suddenly, a branch snapped sharply nearby. Kale's body stiffened, fur rising along his spine. He growled low, a warning deep in his throat. Alara's pulse raced. She had felt fear before, but this was different. This was the fear of the unknown, of forces beyond her comprehension. From the darkness emerged a figure, cloaked and hooded, moving swiftly between the trees. Alara could not see the face, but the presence was unmistakable. The figure carried a long, curved blade glinting even in the dim light. Kale stepped in front of her, his body coiled like a spring. His growl grew louder, filled with power and warning. Alara understood then that the figure had come with intent, not curiosity but threat. The figure stopped a few feet away, raising a hand slowly. "Princess," a voice called out deep and smooth, "you should not be here." Alara's heart skipped. "Who are you?" she asked. The figure lowered the hood, revealing the sharp features of a man she did not know. His eyes, dark and calculating, studied her with a mixture of caution and interest. "I am someone sent to ensure the wolf does not leave this forest alive," he said simply. Alara's stomach tightened. She realized that Kale's safety depended on her now as much as her own depended on him. The bond that had begun with a drop of blood had become a lifeline, and she could not allow this man to destroy what she had just begun to understand. Kale growled again, louder this time, stepping closer to her. The man hesitated, weighing his options. Alara's mind raced. She needed a plan, a way to protect Kale and herself. But before she could act, the man lunged. Kale moved with a speed and grace that left her breathless. In a blur, he intercepted the figure, teeth bared, body low to the ground. Snow flew in every direction as the two circled each other, testing strength, speed, and will. Alara watched, her heart pounding, as the fight unfolded like a dance, violent yet precise. Finally, with a sudden surge, Kale forced the man back. The figure fell into the snow, leaving Kale standing, chest heaving, eyes fixed on him with unrelenting focus. The man disappeared into the shadows, retreating into the forest, leaving a warning in his wake. Alara approached Kale slowly, her hands trembling. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He turned his gaze to her, and for a moment she thought she saw a flicker of relief in his eyes. Then he lowered his head to the snow, not touching her, not yet allowing complete trust but acknowledging her presence. Night fell fully and the forest darkened. Stars appeared, pale and distant, and the snow seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. Alara sat close to Kale, feeling the warmth of life beneath his fur, the slow, steady rhythm of a heartbeat that was not entirely wolf, not entirely man. I think you're part of this world and part of another," she whispered. "I don't know how to help you, but I will try." Kale's eyes softened, a silent acceptance of her words. And in that moment, the distance between beast and human began to shrink, replaced by something fragile, tentative, and powerful. A connection that went beyond fear, beyond danger, beyond understanding. Hours passed, the cold pressing against them, and yet Alara felt a strange warmth. Not just from survival, but from the recognition that she was not alone. That the wolf, the prince, the mystery that had shattered her life so suddenly, was also bound to her in ways she did not yet understand. And then, as dawn approached, a new sound broke the quiet, a distant howl, mournful and full of warning. Kale's ears pricked and he rose, body tense once more. Alara rose with him, heart pounding. "They are coming," Kale seemed to say with his eyes, the intelligence behind them unmistakable. "And we will not be ready." Alara clenched her fists. She would not run. She would face the danger, whatever it was, beside him. The snow shimmered with the first light of dawn, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. The frost-coated trees stood silent, waiting, watching. And somewhere beyond the veil of ice and shadow, more forces stirred, forces that would test their bond, their courage, and the fragile trust that had begun to form between human and wolf. Alara looked at Kale. "We face it together," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Kale's eyes met hers, glowing with something that was not entirely wild, not entirely human, but unmistakably connected to her. And for the first time she felt hope, not for survival alone, but for understanding, for redemption, and perhaps for something more. The forest, ancient and unforgiving, watched them as they prepared for what was to come. And somewhere in the distance, shadows shifted and the first stirrings of a new danger emerged. Alara's journey had deepened. She had entered the frosted vale, a world of peril, of magic, and of creatures that defied reason. And she knew that once you walked into this forest, you could not turn back. The bond of blood had awakened a destiny neither she nor Kale could ignore. The palace of Urindor was alive with whispers. By the time Princess Ilara returned from the forest, the corridors were crowded with servants, guards, and nobles, all speculating about the chaos of the night before. The white wolf, the creature whose eyes were more human than beast, had vanished, leaving behind stories of terror and awe. Some claimed the princess had called a curse upon the castle. Others whispered that the wolf had been an omen, a messenger of ancient wrath. Ilara moved silently through the halls, her cloak drawn tight around her. Every glance she received was sharp, measured, full of suspicion. Even her own advisors seemed distant, as though they feared her presence. Yet in her heart she carried the memory of Kale, of the wolf whose white fur had shone like snow in the forest, whose eyes had mirrored her own soul. She could not forget him, and she knew that soon the time would come when the bond between them would demand action. Her chambers were quiet but not safe. Through the tall windows, snow swirled against the glass, blurring the view of the castle grounds. She removed her cloak and sat by the small fire, her thoughts tangled between fear, longing, and an unfamiliar sense of determination. She had touched a power she did not fully understand, and it had touched her in return. A knock at the door startled her. She rose, moving cautiously toward it. "Who is it?" she asked. "Princess," a voice said. It was soft but firm. "The king requests your presence in the throne room immediately." Ilara's stomach tightened. King Aldrich, her father, had ruled with stern authority and unyielding judgment. He was a man of tradition and power, and he would see the events of the night before as more than a mere accident. He would see them as a challenge to his control. She straightened her back, took a deep breath, and stepped into the cold corridor. The marble floor gleamed beneath her feet, reflecting the pale morning light that filtered through the windows. Servants and guards bowed as she passed, their expressions a mixture of fear and curiosity. The throne room was vast, its walls adorned with banners of the royal house, shimmering in the icy light. At the center, King Aldrich sat upon his throne, his posture rigid, his gaze sharp. Around him, advisors whispered among themselves, casting glances at Ilara that were filled with speculation and unease. "Ilara," the king said, his voice cold and commanding, "you have returned, and yet the night was not spent in safety. The white wolf has brought fear to my palace. Tell me, what do you know of this?" Ilara held her head high. "Father, I went into the forest to understand. I did not intend to bring danger to the palace, but the wolf, it is not merely an animal, it is something more. Something connected to the blood of this kingdom." The king's eyes narrowed. "Connected to the blood of this kingdom," he repeated. "You speak of omens and spirits while the corridors of my castle were filled with terror. Do you take your duty lightly?" "I do not," she said firmly. "But there are things you do not understand. The wolf, or the creature, Kale, he is bound by a curse. He is human beneath the fur, and he is in need of our help." The room grew silent. Even the advisors seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to intervene or remain quiet. The king's gaze shifted to a window, his jaw tight. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice lower, tinged with something more than anger, regret perhaps, or sorrow. "If what you say is true," he said, "then it is a curse of our own making, centuries old, hidden in the shadows of this family, and now it has awakened. Alara's heart ached. She had expected anger, punishment, or disbelief. Instead, she felt the weight of her father's pain, a weight heavier than snow or stone. Yet even as she understood him, she knew that she could not wait for his permission. Kale needed her, and the forest would not wait for politics or propriety. Later that day, as the sun waned and shadows grew long across the palace grounds, Alara found herself alone in the gardens. The frost glistened on every branch, every blade of grass, as if the world itself held its breath. She closed her eyes, listening to the wind, hoping to sense Kale's presence. A soft sound, a movement in the trees made her open her eyes. There he was, the white wolf, massive and silent, watching her from the edge of the frost. His eyes glowed, but not with anger. There was recognition, a faint relief. Alara stepped forward slowly. "Kale," she whispered. He stepped toward her, fur brushing against the snow. She could see the tension in his body, the muscles coiled and ready, yet restrained. He had been in the forest, observing, guarding, waiting for her. And now, as he stood before her, she understood the truth of the bond they shared. "Can you come with me?" she asked softly, unsure if she was speaking to a wolf or to a man trapped within one. "I want to help you to bring you back if that is possible." Kale tilted his head, considering. Then, with a sudden, fluid movement, he transformed. Fur receded, bones shifted, and within moments, a man stood before her. He was tall, with broad shoulders, dark hair streaked with white, and eyes that burned with the intensity of the wolf he had once been. Alara gasped. Kale was human, but the wildness remained in his gaze, a reminder of the creature that still lingered beneath the surface. "You," she began, but words failed her. Kale's lips curved slightly, almost a smile. "You awakened me," he said simply. "With a single drop of blood, you reached across centuries of curse and magic." Alara's heart quickened. "But the palace, your safety." "I know," he said. "That is why I waited. That is why I followed you here. There is more at stake than either of us knows. The king, your father, he holds secrets. Secrets of this curse, of the wolf blood, and of my imprisonment." Alara felt a chill, not from the cold but from the weight of his words. The king had kept these truths hidden for centuries, and now they were caught in a web of magic, power, and destiny that none of them could fully control. Kale took a step closer. "Alara, the curse is not broken, not yet, and there are forces that will come for me, for you, for both of us. The palace is not safe, and neither is the forest, but together, perhaps." His voice trailed, unspoken, yet filled with meaning. Alara met his gaze. "Together," she agreed. Days passed, each filled with planning, conversation, and cautious movement. Kale learned of the court, of the king's rule, and of the political webs that bound the kingdom. Alara taught him about life as a princess, about duty and expectation, about loyalty and love twisted by fear. And through it all, the bond between them grew, silent but undeniable. Kale's wolf instincts remained, hidden just beneath the surface, and Alara felt a thrill and a terror in equal measure. She was drawn to him, but she feared the power that lurked behind those human eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the palace, a new threat emerged. A messenger arrived, breathless and pale. "Princess," he said, bowing, "a group of nobles and sorcerers are gathering in the outer halls. They claim the wolf is a threat, that it must be captured or destroyed." Alara's heart raced. She looked at Kale. "They don't understand," she said. "They never will," he replied. "But we can prepare. We can face them if we must." The tension in the palace mounted. Guards whispered in corners, advisors exchanged glances, and King Aldrich himself seemed torn between anger, fear, and reluctant understanding. The curse, once hidden, had begun to unravel, and with it came questions that could not be avoided. Alara and Kale moved through the corridors, planning, observing, waiting. Every moment brought them closer to confrontation, and yet closer to each other. The fear of discovery mingled with the thrill of connection, creating a tension that neither could ignore. At night, in the quiet of the palace chambers, Kale would speak of the forest, of the spirits that guarded it, and of the centuries he had spent trapped in the form of a wolf. Alara would listen, fascinated and horrified in equal measure, feeling the weight of time and magic pressing down upon them. "You are different," she said once, as he traced the frost patterns on the window. "Not entirely human, and yet more human than anyone I have ever met." "And you," Kale replied, "are stronger than you know, stronger than the curse, stronger than the palace. You awakened me, and perhaps in time you will awaken yourself." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden crash, shouts, the clatter of armor, and the sound of people running. The group of nobles and sorcerers had arrived, moving through the palace with purpose, their intent clear. Ilara and Kale exchanged a glance. The time for planning was over. The palace, the kingdom, and the bond they shared would be tested. They stepped forward together, hearts pounding, eyes fixed on the approaching threat. The frost shimmered beneath their feet, and the cold wind carried the whispers of the forest and the echoes of the past. In that moment, Alara understood the truth of the bond that had begun in the snow. It was not just a connection of blood, but a connection of fate, courage, and destiny. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The castle, ancient and imposing, seemed to shiver under the weight of approaching confrontation. The nobles and sorcerers drew nearer, and the first clash of power was inevitable. Kale's hand brushed against hers, a silent reassurance, a promise in the midst of uncertainty. Alara felt the strength of that touch, and for the first time she did not doubt herself. The palace corridors were alive with tension, each step echoing like the beat of war drums. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the promise of danger and the scent of change. The curse had begun to move, and the world of Urindor would never be the same. Alara and Kale paused at the entrance to the great hall. The shadows of their enemies stretched before them, dark and formidable. The moment hung between them, heavy with anticipation and fear, but also with something more, a spark fragile yet bright that neither frost nor curse could extinguish. Kale's eyes met hers. "Together?" he asked. "Together," she whispered. And with that they stepped forward into the storm of destiny, into the heart of the palace, and into the first true test of their bond. The palace of Urindor was restless. The corridors, once silent and imposing, now echoed with hurried footsteps, whispered warnings, and the soft crackle of magic. The curse that had haunted Kale for centuries had awakened fully, and its presence lingered like frost over the kingdom. Every eye in the court watched for signs of danger, but none could predict the force that was coming. Alara moved beside Kale, her hand brushing his as they walked through the grand hall. The tension was almost unbearable, yet there was a strange comfort in their connection. The blood bond they shared had grown stronger since the forest, and it pulsed with a quiet power, one that both frightened and reassured them. The nobles and sorcerers who had gathered days before now returned, more organized, more determined. They believed Kale to be a threat, a creature of chaos, a danger to the throne. Yet none could see what Alara had come to understand. Kale's power was not meant to destroy, but to protect, to heal, and perhaps to redeem. The throne room was vast, and the air was heavy with anticipation. King Aldrich sat upon the throne, his eyes fixed on Kale, a mixture of fear, anger, and reluctant admiration in their depths. He had known of the curse, of the bloodline, of the wolf who had haunted the forests. But seeing Kale in human form standing beside his daughter brought a weight of guilt and sorrow he could no longer deny. "Kale," the king said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of authority, "you have returned, and yet your presence endangers the palace. I must know, are you friend or foe?" Kale stepped forward, eyes meeting the king's. "I am neither a foe nor a stranger, your majesty. I am bound by the curse your ancestors created and by the blood of this kingdom. I seek no harm, only freedom and perhaps redemption." The room held its breath. Nobles whispered, exchanging glances, uncertain how to react. Alara stood beside Kale, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She could feel the warmth of his body, the pulse of life that was no longer constrained by the wolf, and she knew they had come to the most dangerous moment of their journey. A sudden chill swept the room. Shadows flickered unnaturally along the walls. From the far corners of the hall, whispers rose, almost as if the castle itself were speaking, warning, urging them toward action. The curse was not yet broken. Kale's wolf instincts, though hidden, simmered beneath the surface, threatening to resurface at the slightest provocation. Alara stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. "Father, the wolf is no enemy. He is bound by a curse, one that can only be lifted through trust, courage, and understanding. If we fight him, if we try to control him by force, we will only awaken the darkness further." The king's eyes softened, though his jaw remained tense. "You have always had a courage beyond your years, Alara, but even courage must be tempered by wisdom." Kale moved closer to her, bowing his head slightly in acknowledgement of her words. The bond between them was clear, stronger than fear, stronger than history, and stronger than the curse that had haunted him. He took a deep breath, feeling the pull of the wolf within, and then exhaled, letting it settle for now. Suddenly, the grand doors of the throne room burst open. The nobles and sorcerers who had opposed them entered, their eyes filled with determination, their hands glowing faintly with magic. They moved as one, circling Kale, ready to strike. Alara's heart pounded. She stepped beside Kale, holding out her hands. "Stop," she shouted, voice carrying over the murmurs of the room. "This is not the way. The curse can be broken, but only if we act together. We must not let fear guide our hands." The sorcerers hesitated. Kale's gaze swept over them, his presence commanding, not threatening. "I do not seek your harm," he said. "I am a victim of the curse as much as I am its prisoner. Help me and you help yourselves. Fight me and the darkness will consume us all." A tense silence filled the hall. Then slowly, one of the senior sorcerers lowered her hand. Others followed, though some remained cautious, unwilling to fully trust what they did not understand. The castle itself seemed to hold its breath. Alara stepped closer to Kale. "Now," she whispered, "we can do this together." Kale nodded. He extended his hand toward her and she placed her own in his. The moment their hands touched, a warmth spread through the room, faint but undeniable. Their blood bond resonated, intertwining their power and courage. Snow-like sparks of magic flickered across the marble floor, and the shadows on the walls seemed to shift, softening, retreating. The curse, ancient and powerful, reacted to the unity of their hearts. Kale closed his eyes, letting the warmth of Alara's hand guide him, guiding the wolf within him to rest. The energy around them pulsed, filling the room with a strange, gentle light that made even the skeptical nobles pause. King Aldrich stood, voice trembling slightly. "I see now the truth of what has been hidden. The curse, it was never meant to destroy but to teach. And now, through the bond of blood and courage, it can be lifted." Kale opened his eyes. The wolf within him had settled, the instincts that had driven him to violence now dormant. He took a deep breath, feeling the centuries of anger, fear, and loneliness slowly wash away. Alara's presence anchored him, gave him strength, and allowed him to step fully into his human self. Yet even as the light in the room spread, there remained a sense of tension. The curse was ancient, and such magic never truly disappears. From the far corners of the hall, faint whispers of the wolf's spirit lingered, watching, waiting. Alara looked up at Kale, her eyes meeting his. "It's over," she whispered. Kale shook his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "Not over," he said softly, "but beginning." The king stepped forward, placing a hand on Kale's shoulder. "You have my forgiveness," he said, "and my gratitude. You are no longer a prisoner of the curse, nor of the bloodline that bound you. You are free, and you are part of this kingdom once more." Alara felt tears prick her eyes. The tension, the fear, the long nights of uncertainty, They were not gone, but they had been transformed into something else: hope, trust, and the quiet, steady flame of possibility. Kale turned to her. "I could not have done this without you," he said. His voice was quiet, sincere, and filled with emotion. "You reached across centuries to bring me back, to bring me peace." Alara smiled, a mixture of relief and pride warming her chest. "And you saved me too," she said. "Not from the wolf or from the curse, but from fear. You showed me that courage and love are stronger than darkness." They stood together, hands still clasped, as the light of the castle seemed to glow around them. The nobles and advisors watched, a mixture of awe and respect in their eyes. Even the skeptics could not deny the transformation that had occurred. Yet the forest and the winter beyond the palace walls still held secrets. The bond they shared, powerful and ancient, would endure. There would be challenges, dangers that tested their strength and their hearts. But for now, in this moment, the curse was lifted, the wolf rested, and the kingdom breathed a collective sigh of relief. Alara and Kale walked to the window, looking out over the frost-covered grounds. The snow sparkled in the morning sun, pure and unbroken. It was a world of beginnings, of possibilities, and of redemption earned through courage and connection. Kale rested his hand lightly on her shoulder. "We have a long journey ahead," he said, "not just to protect the kingdom, but to understand ourselves, our bond, and the magic that has shaped our lives." Alara nodded. "We will face it together," she replied. And together they stepped into the light, the snow at their feet reflecting the hope and power that now burned quietly but fiercely within them. The curse had been lifted, but the bond of blood and destiny remained, a reminder that love, trust, and courage could overcome even the darkest magic. In the days that followed, the kingdom began to heal. Stories of the white wolf became tales of redemption and courage. The palace was no longer a place of fear, but of possibility, where magic and humanity could coexist, and where two souls, bound by blood and trust, had changed the fate of Erendor forever. And as the aurora lit the night sky, painting it with colors beyond imagination, Alara and Kale stood together on the palace balcony, feeling the quiet magic of the world around them. The curse was gone, yet the connection endured, a bond that time, magic, or fear could never break. For once, in centuries of cold and shadow, hearts had been freed.